All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Omar Kashat. I'm one of the adult services librarians here at the Carroll Stream Public Library. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here today. Today's presentation is on all things British by our presenter, John Gowing. And if you're asking why are we doing this program, well, actually it came recommended from the Bartlett Public Library. They had John out and they recommended that we have him as well. And if you have any questions about the recording, I will email everybody when it's ready who registered for this program. It'll be on our YouTube channel. So I'll email you out a link to it, but that may not be till early next week. So, but anyway, with that, I will now hand it over to John.
Oh, thank you, Omar. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the presentation of All Things British at Carroll Stream Public Library. Thank you for giving up an hour of your time. As Omar said, my name's John Gowing. You hopefully can hear from my accent that I am British. I was born in London. I was a teacher for 32 years before becoming a blue badge tour guide. You can see the badge in the middle of the screen there. That's what we guides wear when we're guiding our clients in the UK, and in particular London. And the reason that I'm in the United States was that in 2014, doing a tour in England of a group of Americans from pretty much around Huntley, Elgin, Algonquin. They were all Downton Abbey fans, if you know that BBC programme. And I was taking them around the various sites, and there was a lady travelling. She didn't have a partner. We got to know each other a little bit. Nothing happened. I hasten to add, far too professional. But when she returned to the United States, we emailed each other, and we actually fell in love before we held hands on Skype. And in 2017, she did me the honor of becoming my wife in a park in Chicago, just the two of us and the person that did the ceremony. And I have lived here ever since. And of course, as a tour guide, not being in my home country, but wanting to keep my hand in, I thought, what could I do? So I went into the local library and offered my services to do talks to their communities on all the things that I know as a guide, and that particularly my American clients have found interesting. And I was doing in-person ones, and then of course COVID hit, and the librarians have worked tremendously hard to come to grips with all this new technology, as have many of you, I suspect. Speaking to your children and grandchildren, maybe you've learned the new technology, so well done for that. So this was the very first presentation I did. I've added to it over time, tried to improve it. But this presentation is based on the great questions I get asked when I'm guiding in and around London, particularly by Americans. You know, you see our culture on the television, in movies, and you know a lot about the UK. But, you know, with a bit of fine tuning, some of the questions were really interesting. And so this presentation is a sort of amalgam, if you like, of all the questions that I've been asked over the 12 years or so that I was guiding in the UK. So let's make a start with the first slide, which is our national flag. Now, I'm sure many of you are looking at that and saying, oh yeah, that's the Union Jack. Well, actually, technically, it isn't. It's the Union flag. It's only ever called the Union Jack when it's flying on a ship, because the staff, the flag staff on the ship, is called the Jack. So the Union flag on it is the Union Jack. But what is it actually a union of? Well, if you look at the top of the slide there, you'll see a flag on the left with a red cross on a white background. That is the flag of England. And to the right, you can see a white diagonal, an X shape on a blue background. That is the flag of Scotland. And in 1603, when Queen Elizabeth I, you may recall her, the Virgin Queen, died, the next person in line to the throne was the son of her cousin. He was already King James VI of Scotland, but he became King James I of England. And because his surname was Stuart, it was the end of the Tudors with Elizabeth, the start of the Stuarts. And he decreed that the flag of England and the flag of Scotland should be joined together. And that's what you see in the next row down, the simple red cross on top of the flag of Scotland. And this would have been the flag that the British Army would have carried during the Revolutionary Wars. So we didn't have the red diagonal on it at that point. But then in the 1820s, when Ireland became independent from England or Great Britain, we kept part of it in the northeast, the 6 counties it's called, and it was decided to add the red diagonal, you can see there, of St. Patrick onto the Union flag. And that gave the last flag in the slide there at the bottom, that is the flag as we know it today. And so if you look, you'll see that the red diagonals, the cross of St. Patrick, don't follow through in a straight line. They're slightly offset. Can you see that? And the reason for that is that it was thought that if they put the flag of St. Patrick directly onto the flag of Scotland, it would diminish Scotland's seniority because Scotland and England were joined together much earlier. So they decided to offset it. And that is how it is possible to make a mistake and fly the Union flag upside down. Now, obviously, the flag of the United States, if you turn it upside down, it's pretty obvious. But, you know, you would think the Union flag, if you didn't know it very well, you know, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that the flag should always be flown with the thick white bar that you can see indicated by the yellow arrow there at the top of the flagstaff. You know, traditionally, if you see a picture of a flag in a book, it is assumed that the flagpole, we call it in England, but the flagstaff in the United States is on the left. So this is the correct way to fly the Union flag. And just to give you an idea, that's what it's like when it's upside down. Can you see the thin white bar there? Now that's done for 2 reasons. One, ignorance, that people don't know how to fly the Union flag up the correct way. And many is the time in London when I've been meeting clients at hotels, I've looked up to see the Union flag outside and it's upside down. So I've gone in and spoken to the people at reception, and mostly they're from Europe, working in England for a short period of time, and they don't know what the heck I'm talking about, but it's just my thing. And the other way that it gets flown upside down, and this is deliberate, is that it's a sign of SOS, Mayday. And during the Second World War, there were a couple of islands that belonged to Great Britain. They're actually closer to France than Britain. They're called the Channel Islands. They were invaded by the Nazis, and the Channel Islanders turned their Union flags upside down as a kind of, you know, finger to the Nazis, until of course they tore them all down and put their swastikas up. So there's an example of one upside down on the left beside the French flag, you can see. And the next slide I really like, because this guy is one of these horrible little nationalists, you know, just wants England for the English. You know, we moved on from that. And he's made a big thing of putting this on his house. And all we want is our country back, but he is too ignorant to even fly his flag up the right way. I only just put that in for a bit of fun. Now, the other flag that you might see occasionally is this one, and this is the Royal Standard. This is the one that's flown over the royal palaces when Her Majesty is actually in the building. And you'll see that the top left and the bottom right corners are exactly the same, 3 lions. And that's the badge that the England soccer team, the national team, wear on their shirts. That's why they're often called the 3 lions. And the lion was chosen as the symbol of England by King Richard I. Now, you may know of him, everybody, as Richard the Lionheart. He was king from 1189 to 1199, and probably was one of the worst kings that we've ever had, because of his 10-year reign, he was only in England for about 3 months, and he only spoke French. And anyway, he was a brave guy. He was fighting in crusades and all the rest of it. So we can't take that away from him. But he chose the lion as the symbol of England. And when he was killed in 1199, and his brother John, my namesake, became king, again, another bad king, to the point that he was dragged into a field and forced to sign the very first Bill of Human Rights, if you like, Magna Carta. He actually confirmed the lion. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a red lion on a yellow background with some French fleur-de-lis around the side. And this was the emblem of James I, James VI of Scotland, who became king in 1603. So the lion rampant there is Scottish. And the bottom left, the harp, is Ireland. And I did get several questions when I first did this, when people said, well, what about Wales? You know, where is Wales on any of the flag? Well, Wales is not represented on either the Union flag or the Royal Standard. And there it is flying above Buckingham Palace. And I have had guests who've been to England maybe 20, 25 years ago, and they would see the Union flag flying and say, oh, the Queen's at home. And they would have been absolutely right, because prior to 1997, the Union flag flew if Her Majesty was present, and there was no flag when she wasn't. And of course, you know what happened on the 31st of August, 1997. Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. The Queen was in Scotland with William and Harry, Diana and Charles's sons, and there was no flag on the palace to lower to half staff. And a lot of people got very angry about this. And so the system was ultimately changed. So there is always a flag flying over the royal palaces now, the Union flag when Her Majesty is not there, and the Royal Standard when she is. Now, a very common question I get is, you know, what are you guys? Are you Great Britain? Are you the United Kingdom? Or are you the British Isles? Well, we're all three. And let's see if I can explain this to you now. Let's start with Great Britain. Great Britain is, as you can see from the map there, England, Wales, and Scotland. So effectively, it's the three countries that are joined together. The United Kingdom is a political alliance which includes Northern Ireland. Remember, I said a little earlier that the Republic of Ireland was occupied by the British. In the 1920s, it got its independence, but the British kept 6 counties in the northeast. So the United Kingdom is Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the British Isles is everything that you can see from space, and that includes the island of Ireland, if that makes sense. So hopefully we'll get that sorted out. The population of England currently, last time I checked, is about 56 million. The population of Scotland is about 5.5 million people. Wales is just over 3, and Northern Ireland is about 1.5. So those are the populations of the United Kingdom. Now, obviously, this photograph was taken a while ago. We will cover the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh there on the seat at the front. But this is the immediate royal family before any marriages. There is Her Majesty the Queen. She is 94 years of age now. And she is the world's longest serving monarch. Up until 2015, it was actually the King of Thailand, but he died. So Her Majesty is the longest serving monarch. And next year, 2022, we will be celebrating her platinum anniversary, 70 years on the throne. And in my opinion, she has done an absolutely wonderful job. She married the Duke of Edinburgh, who was created Prince Philip in 1957. And a lot of people say, well, you know, he married the Queen, so why didn't he become king? Well, it doesn't work like that, because if he had come with the rank of king from another country, let's say he'd been the king of Greece, for example, then he could have become king of England when he married the Queen for her lifetime. But he didn't bring that rank with him. He had no rank, really. He was created a duke. So he, apart from being elevated to a prince by Her Majesty, then that's why he didn't become king. On the left of Her Majesty in the picture, looking a little bit younger, I mean, he's 72 now, Prince Charles. He holds the world's record for waiting. And again, a common question, will the Queen ever abdicate and hand the throne over to William because of Charles's, I don't want to say unpopularity, but maybe the scandal with Camilla and Diana? And the answer to that is a resounding no, because Her Majesty made an oath at her coronation on June the 2nd, 1953, to remain the monarch until she dies. The only way that Charles will not become king is if he dies before his mother. And the Windsor women are quite long-lived. The Queen Mother, she lived to be 101 and a half. So kind of watch this space. Now, in the back row on the left, we have Prince Andrew. He's in a lot of bother at the moment. It's not my place to comment on it. I only hear it through the media. But he stepped down from royal duties and he's facing a lawsuit for his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Let's just leave it at that. In the middle, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. She has a bit of a reputation of being a little bit standoffish, but she's not. She really is one of the hardest working royals. She's very pleasant. She's a bit like her dad. She speaks her mind. The Duke of Edinburgh used to say what was on his mind. I think she's inherited that more than any of them. So she can come across as a little bit abrasive, but she's not, and she's very, very hardworking. And then on the right, we have the Earl of Wessex. So that's Prince Edward, and he's a pretty hardworking royal as well. Married, has a couple of children. So this was the immediate royal family before, sadly, we lost Prince Philip earlier in the year, aged 99. This display went up at Piccadilly Circus. If you've been to London, you'll recognize the statue there. And he was in hospital. Obviously, he knew what the score was. He didn't want to die in hospital. So they sent him back to Windsor Castle, where he passed. And then his body was brought down on this green Land Rover. And because obviously of COVID restrictions, there couldn't be as many people there who wanted to mourn his passing as there might otherwise have been. And he was put into the royal crypt in St. George's Chapel there on the left-hand side. Now, speaking of Her Majesty, I mean, obviously this was taken a little while ago. People often see photographs of her and say that she always looks a little bit grumpy. I suspect I would be if I had to shake thousands of hands every day. But she was never more happy than when she is at the races, the horse racing. She's a very accomplished horsewoman. I mean, she still rides now, and she owns several racehorses, and she likes nothing more than to go to the races and watch her horses compete. And of course, you know that in 2012, I can't believe, you know, we're talking, what is it, 9, nearly 10 years ago, London was the very first city in the world to be granted the Olympic Games for a third time. And I watched the opening ceremony, and of course you may recall that James Bond, Daniel Craig there, goes to the palace, and the Queen is sitting at a desk. And I would have put my mortgage on the fact that it was a lookalike actress. And when the Queen turned around, she had a twinkle in her eye, and her and Mr. Bond, they went in the helicopter, and of course the Queen jumped out in the parachute to open the games. I mean, the timing was absolutely brilliant. The the stunt parachutist landed behind the stadium, and then there was about a sort of 10-15 minute gap, and then Her Majesty came in, wearing exactly the same dress to open the games. So she does have a sense of humor. And of course, you know that Charles married Diana, and they had 2 children together. And then sadly, she was divorced from Charles. It was in the media all the time, each one telling their side of the story, if you like. And then sadly, she was killed in the car crash, killed on the 31st of August 1997. Her funeral took place on September the 6th at Westminster Abbey. And I mean, being a guide, you can appreciate, I know lots of dates off by heart, but those 2 dates stay in my mind all the time, because August 31st, the day she was killed, was my father's birthday, and September the 6th was mine. So there wasn't much family celebration in the Gowing household when this was taking place. Watched on television by an estimated 1.5 billion people throughout the world. She's not buried in the Abbey. Her service was there, and then her body was taken by car to be buried on an island on a lake at the Spencer family estate north of London. And then more happily, we have William there marrying Kate Middleton, and he's wearing the uniform of the Irish Guards, of which he's Colonel in Chief. And the blue sash across his shoulder tells us that he's also a qualified RAF pilot. He flies helicopters, or he used to. And of course, that was a very, very happy occasion. And the first thing that a lady has to do when she marries the heir to the throne is produce an heir and a spare. And Kate has done the country proud. We have an heir, a spare, and a spare. So there are the 3 children. Quite recent photograph. There's George on his dad with the green jumper and the jeans, and then Princess Charlotte in the middle, and then Prince Louis. And interestingly, you know that the reason that Her Majesty became Queen was that on the death of her father in 1952, she became Queen because her father and mother only had 2 children, Elizabeth and her sister Margaret, so there were no sons. So Elizabeth became Queen. And before Kate gave birth to George, the countries that Her Majesty is still head of state, and there are about 56 of them in the Commonwealth, they had a conference to decide whether they wanted to keep the antiquated, in my opinion, rule that it would be the first boy born, and quite rightly they did away with it. So as it happened, she gave birth to George, but if Charlotte had come first, then Charlotte would be the heir to the throne. And this is the first time for over 130 years that we have 3 direct heirs in line to the throne at the same time. So we have Charles, of course, and then his son William, and then his son George. And then, more recently, we had this happen. Prince Harry, well loved by the British people, fought for his country in Afghanistan with your brave boys and girls too. Fell in love with this lady, Meghan Markle. It was a bit of a whirlwind romance, but the British people were very happy. They really liked Harry. They really wanted to support him, and were very pleased that he was in love and had found the right person. And they were married in a ceremony at Windsor Castle, which was beamed live pretty much all around the world, and they were very happy. And the British people turned out in their droves to cheer them on. And that was where they got married. That's Windsor Castle. I do a lot of guiding there as well. That's about 20 miles west of London. It's out near Heathrow Airport, which is one of the major London airports. And that's a fantastic place. It's the oldest continually inhabited castle in the world. Most of it is quite modern. It was built in the sort of between the 1820s and 1830s by King George IV. And but some of it is very old. The base of the round tower that you can see in the middle there dates back to the 12th century. And the chapel to the left of the picture, St. George's Chapel, that dates back to the 16th century, much of it. And there are 10 monarchs buried in there. Charles I, we'll be talking about him a little later in the presentation. Henry VIII is buried there as well. And Queen Victoria is buried in the grounds of Windsor Castle at a place called Frogmore. And the Queen's parents are in there too, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And that's where the Duke of Edinburgh was interred as well. And that's where the Queen will go when she passes. The top left, you can see the river. That's the River Thames. The Thames is 210 miles long. We'll see it later in the presentation in central London and talk about it a little more then. So they had their first child, a son, Archie, not short for Archibald, just picked randomly. It means brave. It's a sort of Scottish derivative name. Harrison, oh, that was quite fun, Harry's son. And then Mountbatten, which is a family name. You may have heard of the Mountbattens. They were of German extraction, and their surname up until the First World War, 1914, 1918, was Battenberg, but it was German, Batten Mountain. And so they changed it to Mountbatten. They made it more English. And incidentally, at the same time, King George V didn't think it was a good idea for the British royal family to have German surnames, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha, because of course, you know, Queen Victoria married her German cousin. So he changed the name to Windsor. So, and then obviously the little boy's surname is Windsor. They've since had a second child, Lily. Some controversy about that, about whether they did ask the Queen's permission, because her proper name is Lilibet. And Lilibet was the pet name that Queen Elizabeth II had. She couldn't pronounce Elizabeth. And the papers were full of, you know, did he ask permission, or was he trying to get back in the good books? But you know that they've stepped away from royal duties. They said they couldn't stand the pressure. Meghan Markle was saying that, you know, she was picked on and victimized and all the rest of it. I don't propose to go into the rights and wrongs. They're just a very troubled couple, but not troubled enough that they couldn't earn $18 million by having an interview with Oprah Winfrey. And I do find it strange that 18 things they said during the interview have been proved untrue, and that they said that they moved to America to get out of the limelight, but all they're doing is trading on their royal status. And that's the only comment I would make on that. I hope that they are able to sort it out. So here is the line of succession, because people say, well, where is Harry now? And you know, what about Andrew and Princess Anne and all that sort of stuff? So there is the current monarch, Queen Elizabeth. Then you've got Charles William George, as we've mentioned. Then the other two children, Charlotte and Louis. Then Harry's moved out to 6th, and Archie and Lilibet, Harry's two children, 7 and 8. Then Andrew's two daughters, and Princess Eugenie has just given birth to a little girl, not just, you know, a few months ago, and she married a man whose surname was Brooksbank. So we have August Brooksbank, but we don't have a photograph of her or of Lilibet. Now, I hope nobody's offended by this. I just put this in for a bit of fun. When I moved to America, you know, I realized that we are two great nations, you know, divided by a common language, as somebody famous once said. And I was learning new expressions all the time. And one of the ones I learned early was cutting the cheese. I had absolutely no idea what this was until my wife Audrey explained it to me. And so I just put this in for a bit of fun. So in the top strip, you can see 5 of them standing on the balcony taking a salute on a parade day. And what happens is that the Duke of Edinburgh quite clearly cuts the cheese. In the middle picture, you've got Harry sort of picking it up, Anne is looking over to see what's going on. Charles, altogether not sure why Harry's giggling. And the Queen's face completely implacable, wonderful. And then if you look in the last picture, Harry obviously can, not only having heard it, maybe smell it, and look at the look of disgust on Her Majesty's face. So even if they're royals, they cut the cheese with the best of us. So one of my most asked questions is, what role does the Queen play in the governance of the United Kingdom? And the answer to that is none whatsoever. The best way I can explain it is that she reigns, but she doesn't rule. And although it was kind of long and complicated, this story hopefully will tell you or explain to you how the ball got rolling, that the monarch lost true power. Now, this is King Charles I. He was the son of James I that we've already spoken about. James I died in 1625, so Charles took over. Now, James had brought Charles up to be very arrogant and to believe that the king could do no wrong, the divine right of kings, that the king was God's representative on earth. And Charles believed this. But even though he was the ruler, in our constitution in the United Kingdom, and we have an unwritten constitution, not like the United States written constitution, ours is unwritten. If the king needed money, if he wanted to raise tax or whatever, then he had to ask Parliament's permission. But it was also the king's prerogative to summon Parliament and close it, dissolve it when he felt like it. So in the 1630s in Scotland, the leaders of the church there wanted to reorganize it and get rid of bishops. And Charles, as head of the church, the legacy from Henry VIII, that story maybe for another day, didn't agree. They didn't ask his permission. And so he summoned Parliament to ask for money, to raise taxes, to raise an army, to go north to teach the Scots a lesson. So when he summoned Parliament and put this question to them, they actually refused. And he said, "Why are you refusing?" And the king. And they said, "Well, the last time you summoned us, which was a good few years ago, you promised to give Parliament more authority, more concessions on things, excuse me, and you haven't kept your promise. So you're not having the money." And Charles was furious. So he dissolved Parliament and he marched north with as much of an army as he could cobble together, and he got his butt kicked. I mean, so much so that the Scots chased him back into England. So he came back to Parliament and summoned them again and said, "Look, the Scots are in England. Grant me the money so I can go and send them back to Scotland." And again, Parliament, with pretty much one voice, said, "Well, you know, we don't dislike the Scots. It's your problem. You started this. You're not having the money." And Charles was so angry that he then sent soldiers to Parliament to arrest the ringleaders, the men that he thought were the ones that were most vociferous against him. One of whom was this gentleman, a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell was Member of Parliament for Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, which, if you don't know map of England, it's sort of northeast of London, close to where the bulge sticks out. You have Norfolk, and then you have Suffolk, and then you have Cambridgeshire. But he and his four friends, they heard the soldiers were coming, and they escaped. And Charles was absolutely incandescent with rage, dissolved Parliament and declared war on it. Now, the king took his supporters to Oxford and set up the royal standard there. The parliamentarian army stayed around London. And the reason they did that was that they were supported by the merchants in the City of London. The City of London was the financial powerhouse, if you like, and they were fed up with the king taxing them randomly for this and that. And they thought that they would be better off funding Parliament. And the battles in what became known as the English Civil War started. Now, this quite clearly is a modern photograph. We have reenactments of the English Civil War, just like you have reenactments over here, the American Civil War, people from the South and the North, dressing up in their greys and blues and reenacting. So we have them occasionally in England. And to start with, the early 1640s, the battles were very small scale. This is a photograph taken from a reenactment, but it wouldn't have been much bigger than this. So you'd have, two very small armies turn up in a field on a Sunday morning, take a few shots at each other and probably go down the pub. If you'd come from America to ask, where's the war, you'd have had to have been directed to it. But in about 1642, it started to get more bloody because Charles brought soldiers back from Ireland who were used to brutalizing the Irish. And Cromwell said, look, we can't just keep having these farm boys turn up. They're untrained. We've got to train them. So he commissioned his general, a man by the name of Thomas Fairfax, to train them and pay them and make sure that they were more professional. And they became known as the New Model Army. And the battles got much bloodier and the killing went up. In fact, the English Civil War, more men were killed per head of the population than in the Great War, which the armistice was signed today, I'm sure you know, at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month. And 900,000 Commonwealth English troops were killed. It's horrible. Anyway, so these were the major battles, but the last one there, you can see Naseby in 1645, just north of Oxford. And at the Battle of Naseby, Parliament won a decisive battle. That was the end of the resistance of the king. And he was told that they still wanted a king. They still wanted a figurehead. He was God's anointed person on earth, but that he had to acknowledge the authority of Parliament. After all, Parliament had won the war. Now, he said he would comply with that, but behind the back of Parliament, he tried to get an army from France, because his wife was a French Catholic, to come and fight, and also an army from Ireland, Irish Catholics. And when Parliament heard that the king was negotiating to do this, he was arrested and put on trial for his life in London, the Great Hall of Westminster. And all through the trial, he fiddled with his hat, he played with his gloves. He said, I acknowledge the power of Parliament, but not its authority. And pretty much in a fit of exasperation, he was found guilty of treason towards the English people. And on January the 30th, 1649, having spent the night at a palace quite close to Buckingham Palace, St. James's Palace, he was walked across the parkland and brought to the Banqueting House. He was brought there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it took 4 hours for Oliver Cromwell to persuade all the people that needed to sign and seal the death warrant. And there is the actual death warrant down the bottom on the right with all those red wax seals. And at 2 o'clock, he was taken out and beheaded on a scaffold that had been built outside the Banqueting House. Now, if you're interested in films, I can thoroughly recommend a movie called Cromwell. That's where the still has been taken there with Alec Guinness playing Charles, and he does a fantastic job. And it pretty much tells the whole story in more detail and in a more entertaining way than the hour that we have now with so much to cover. So look out for Cromwell. Cromwell's actually played by the Irish actor Richard Harris. It's a wonderful movie. I can watch it over and over. So there is an old sort of lithograph, if you like, or a print of the king's execution. And this is what Banqueting House looks like today. It's all that's left of the Palace of Whitehall, which burned down in a fire in the 1690s. The Banqueting House was spared. So this is the actual building, been cleaned up and looked after. But that's the building outside which Charles was beheaded. Now, for the next 11 years, Oliver Cromwell ruled the country as Lord Protector. And it was a pretty horrible time for English people because Cromwell was a Puritan. And so Christmas was cancelled, children weren't allowed to play out, the theatres were closed, they were all seen as ungodly. And when Cromwell was dying in 1658, he passed the protectorship to his son Richard. And Richard kind of raised eyebrows because nobody thought that he was up for the job. He hadn't particularly distinguished himself in the Civil War. He'd not held any high office at all, but his father made him protector. And interestingly, he inherited a country millions of dollars in debt, and the army and parliament, who had been great allies during the Civil War, were now at each other's throats. Excuse me. Parliament thought the army was going to undertake a coup and overthrow Parliament, and the army was angry because Parliament wasn't paying them. And Richard was given the job of trying to sort it out. Well, you know, sometimes when there are two arguing factions, they bring in a neutral referee for the sake of argument, and the referee doesn't make any progress. Well, both sides turned on him, and he got the nicknames Tumble Down Dick, Queen Dick, my favorite, and Hickory Dick. And we think that's where the children's nursery rhyme Hickory Dickory Dock comes from. So he only stayed in power for a year. He couldn't stand the pressure, so he resigned. So Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse, him, ran up the clock, the seat of power. The clock struck 1, there's his year in office. The mouse ran down, Hickory Dickory Dock. And if I'm ever lucky enough to be invited back to Carroll Stream Library to do my dark history of nursery rhymes, that's one of the rhymes that I cover. So I'd look forward to that. Anyway, after the year, Richard resigned. And so a deputation of parliamentarians went over to France to meet with the son of the beheaded king, also called Charles, and invited him to come back to England to be the king, but under much reduced circumstances, you know, that Parliament was the authority. And Charles said, okay, I'll do that. And so in 1660, we had the period known as the Restoration of the monarchy. And he, remembering what had happened to his father, pretty much stayed out of politics, to the point that we know for certain that he had at least 27 children, and none of them with his wife. He had at least 16 mistresses, probably more. And, you know, it's no wonder they called him the Merry Monarch. And those of you who are knowledgeable about breeds of dog, you'll know about a King Charles Spaniel. So if you look at Charles in the picture there, wearing his horsehair wig, that is why the Spaniel is named for him, because you have the big ears hanging down. He died in 1685 with no legitimate heir, because obviously his wife was unable to conceive. And so when he died in 1685, his younger brother James took over, Dismal Jimmy, and that story is for another day. So that really was the start of how the power was taken away from the monarch, and Parliament rose in power and authority. Now, when I take people around Westminster Abbey, I can stand in front of most things and do my guiding, but there's a little sort of area at the extreme east of the church where we're not allowed to guide because it's very narrow. So we just put our group in and we tell them what to look for. And I've had several clients who've come out and having seen this plaque on the floor and said, well, you've told us that story about Oliver Cromwell, but he was only 3 years old. And of course, you know, at first glance, when you're in London and you're all very excited and, you know, trying to take everything in, it would be an easy mistake to make. So I'm not saying anybody is silly. I probably would have done the same. But I explained to them that when Cromwell died, he was actually given a state funeral and he was buried here in the Abbey. But when Charles was restored, he actually went after the men who had signed his father's death warrant whether they were alive or not. And Cromwell's body was disinterred and put on trial at Westminster Hall. I think he reserved the right to remain silent, and was found guilty of regicide, and that's, you know, murdering the king, of course, you know that. And the head was hacked off the body. The body was just thrown into a rubbish pit, we believe. And the head was put on a spike outside Parliament, where it remained for over 20 years. We don't know what finally happened to the skull. There is a story that someone took it to the college that Cromwell was educated in Cambridge, and it's actually there. But I'm not sure there's positive proof of that one way or another, but it's a nice story. Oh, I beg your pardon, it's a little bit lively. Let's jump back. Now, I'm sure many of you will have heard of the Great Fire of London that happened in 1666 in the City of London, known as the Square Mile. That's for another day. This fire that you're looking at, the painting here, took place in 1834 and burned down the Houses of Parliament. You can make out the fires burning the buildings there. The only building that didn't burn down was the Great Hall, and that still exists today. And it's wonderful that that still exists, because it's been there for, you know, nearly 900 years. It was repaired. It had some damage during the Blitz in the Second World War, but the Great Hall is still there. But every other building on the site burned down, and it was decided that they would hold a competition, and architects could put in a design for a new Parliament building. But the architects were told that their design had to be in Victorian Gothic architectural style. This was all the rage. So pointed windows, lots of decoration. And the winning design was this. And this was the design of an architect called Charles Barry. And they started to build it. And about halfway through building it, they decided that they wanted a clock. There was no clock in the original plan. So they put up a 318-foot tower. The bell mechanism was created by a very famous clockmaker by the name of E.J. Dent, who had made several church clocks that were good in bad weather in church clock towers. And a 14-ton bell was cast at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, which is in the east of London, so maybe about 7 or 8 miles away. And the bell was brought to the tower. It was hauled up to the top, and when the man who cast the bell saw the mechanism of the clock and the big hammer that was to bang the bell on the hour, he said that the hammer was too big. And E.J. Dent said, nonsense, it'll be fine. So he had the seniority. The bell stayed up there, and after a month the bell actually cracked. So rather than bring it all the way down again and recast it, they welded a metal plate onto the crack to stop it spreading, and they turned the bell 90 degrees, a quarter of a turn, and of course reduced the size of the clapper hitting the bell. And that's why to this day the bell, Big Ben, is so distinctive. You can hear it on the radio, or you hear it on movies. You know that that is Big Ben. And the clock isn't actually Big Ben, it's the bell. And so I sometimes, if I'm on a coach and I've got students, I say, hands up if you can see Big Ben. And of course they all put their hands up, and I say, no, you can't see Big Ben, it's actually the bell. But everybody calls it Big Ben. It's the largest four-faced chiming clock in the world. Now, once I was doing a whole load of jobs, I was getting tired, and I said it was the largest four-faced clock in the world. And a gentleman from Seattle was quite right in correcting me. He said, no, there's one that's bigger in Seattle, but it doesn't chime. It doesn't do the Westminster chimes. The hour hand is 8 feet long on each side. The minute hand is 22 feet long, and it's actually a foot between each of the minute segments. And you'd have to say it's probably, for me, arguably, the most famous clock in the world. Now, we're not altogether sure why it's called Big Ben. It's one of two reasons. One is that when the bell was put up there was a very famous Victorian boxer who was huge, and his name was Benjamin Caunt, C-A-U-N-T. And so everything was Big Ben. The more likely explanation is that there was a man working with Sir Charles Barry called Sir Benjamin Hall. And so that's why it actually got its name. Now, a question about British politics comes up quite a lot. So let's see if we can do a whistle-stop tour of our system of government. Right, you can see there is a map of the United Kingdom, white, but you can see that there are all these boundary lines over it. The country is divided up into 650 areas. These areas are called constituencies, and they are not the same size geographically. So if you look at the two yellow arrows, look at the bottom one, that's pointing to London, actually where London is. But the upper arrow is pointing to an exploded view of London. And there are 71 constituencies just in that area. If you look at the blue arrow at the top, it's pointing to the north of Scotland, and that is a really big area. So constituencies are not the same size geographically. They contain the same, roughly the same number of people who are eligible to vote, between 90 and about 140,000. So obviously it's much easier to get 140,000 people in London with a population of 8.62 million in a very small area. So every 5 years we have a general election where each area votes for whoever it is that has stood up for election there. And we have many more parties than Democrat and Republican. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then all the votes are counted. Of course, you know, we're much smaller than the United States. It's a much quicker process. We generally know, you know, very early in the morning, the next day, who the winners are. Now, obviously, these 650 people belong to, for the most part, political parties. And what we want after an election is that one particular party wins over half of those 650. The reason for that is that if they don't win half, let's say they get more than anybody else, but they don't get half, it means that all the other parties could join together and outvote the government. So that's very weak. So what we want is the winning party to have 20 or 30 more, because that makes for a strong government. They can't lose a vote. And so Boris Johnson called an election when he became leader of the party, because he was fed up with Brexit dragging on so long. You know, David Cameron resigned, Theresa May resigned, and, you know, Boris Johnson took over. So he had an election. And while we're talking of Boris Johnson, a big difference between the US and the UK is that in the US, you vote for the president. In the UK, we vote for the political party, but it is the political party's business who their leader is. So that's why when Theresa May resigned, the Conservative Party, all the people who were official card-carrying Conservatives, voted for the one of the 3 or 4 people that wanted to become Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson won. And Johnson took a gamble, and he had the general election there, and you can see the map of the United Kingdom there, and it looks very complicated. But if you look to the left, you can see the sort of table there as best I've done it. The Conservatives won 360. So remember, they only have to win 326. So, you know, they're 34 up. So that's a strong government. Labour 199, and I won't read them all, but the Scottish National one is very interesting, the yellow, and you can see all of Scotland is Scottish National, and Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own members of parliament. And this is why the Scots said, well, we want to stay in the European Union and we want to have another vote that we want to break away from Great Britain and all the rest of it. So that's all interesting. Although Boris Johnson said there wouldn't be another referendum, they had one in 2014, the year I met Audrey when she was on her tour in England. The referendum was held, and I went to bed really sad that we could have lost Scotland, but luckily the majority of the Scottish people voted to remain. So hopefully there won't be another one for a long time. So that is the current political map, and that's why Boris Johnson was able to get us out of the European Union, the will of the British people, and the rest, as they say, is history. So here is the House of Commons. We have what we call a bicameral system, so two chambers, like you do here, Senate and Congress. We have the House of Commons. This is the powerhouse. This is where the 650 MPs gather. Now, not all 650 turn up. The Irish Catholic MPs that represent Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, they don't take their place in Parliament because it's a protest at British rule. The gentleman sitting under the canopy, if you see the clock there, about two-thirds of the way up the slide, there's a canopy, and then there's a gentleman sitting on the chair. He is the Speaker. Now, he has to be an MP. He has to win one of the constituencies, but when he becomes Speaker, by popular choice of all the parties, because he has to be neutral, he no longer gets a vote unless there's an absolute tie, and that hasn't happened. And his three deputy speakers, because he can't be there all the time, it'd be an exhausting job, you can see them sitting in front of him, they don't get a vote either. The government is sitting on our left as we're looking at the slide, the Speaker's right, and the opposition, that's all the other parties, are on the other side. The people in the gallery up there could be the press, or specially invited guests. It used to be that you could go into Parliament and see one of the sittings. I think you can still do that, but not like when I was a child. You could just turn up and queue up and go in. But you know, security has changed exponentially, so I think you have to contact your MP and be vetted before you can do that. So those are the people in the gallery. It's not always like this all day, every day. Sometimes there are very few people in there for a particular debate, but it is always full on a Wednesday morning when we have what's called Prime Minister's Questions. And this is where the opposition try to humiliate the Prime Minister by asking questions that make him feel, you know, difficult or stressed. And people from the government ask questions that the Prime Minister can give a good and glowing answer to. It's quite entertaining. It's all very civil in a British way. I mean, I look at some American politicians, the way they speak about each other, and I think, well, that's American. It's not for me to comment. I'm a guest here. But in Britain, it's all very restrained. If a government person is speaking to an opposition person, they have to say the right honourable lady or the right honourable gentleman. If they're speaking to somebody on their own side, then they refer to them as my right honourable friend, because they're in the same party. Before we leave this slide, you'll see the two red lines there. This is a reminder that it used to be that members of Parliament could take their swords in, and quite often debates would get heated and would end in a sword fight. So the two red lines are 2 sword lengths apart. It's just one of those quirky British traditional things. The upper chamber, the House of Lords, these are the lords of the realm, if you like. They act as a sort of checks and balance chamber. They can't stop anything the House of Commons wants to do. The House of Commons, you know, is the government, if you like. But there are a lot of experienced people here who maybe did time as members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and they get elevated to the peerage. And this is where Her Majesty comes to open Parliament every year. She reads a speech prepared by the government. So again, you know, she takes no part in politics. She reads the speech of what the government is intending to do. So just as we're on the home straight now, I can see it's 8 o'clock. I don't want to hold anybody up, but the development of London I get asked about. Well, London is because of the Romans. They came to Britain for the first time in 55 BC under the leadership of Julius Caesar, but they didn't stay. In 43 AD, they came back. And when their galleys came up the River Thames, there you can see from the right, the sea is off to the right in this picture. They saw an area with two little hills that they could defend, a freshwater stream you can make out in the picture to the left of the bridge, where they could get their drinking water, and they created a little trading post that their ships could get out into the North Sea and back over to mainland Europe. And they also built a bridge. The River Thames was much slower, much wider in those days. There was no embankment built. And they called their little trading post Londinium. And about 140 years later, about 190 AD, they weren't feeling quite so secure, so they built a wall around it. So the protection was the river on the south side, but can you see the wall going around with the little fort there, the little rectangle? That was a barracks for Roman soldiers. Now the Romans stayed in Great Britain till 410 AD. They actually stayed in Britain longer than the United States has been a country. And when they left us open to all sorts of people that were sailing by with pointy helmets and sharp swords, and the history then developed from there for another time. So here is a map of London during Tudor times. The city went up from a population of 80,000 to about 250,000, and you can still see London Bridge there. London Bridge was the only bridge across the river for about 550 years in the central area. The first stone bridge, replacing the wooden one, was built around about 1215. And you can see the north side of the river there. London is starting to spread westward. And this is kind of, you know, a snapshot, a part of it, of what we have today. London Bridge is the one at the very top of the slide. The one right in the middle is Tower Bridge. So called because it is close to the Tower of London. When it was built, the designer was told not to make it look too modern against the Tower of London. Population of about 8.7 million now, and every day in the greater London area, and the city itself is 600 square miles, that's the greater London area, over 300 different languages and dialects are spoken. And when I see this slide, I feel just a teeny bit homesick. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much for Omar and Carol Stream for having me, and for you for giving up an hour of your time. I hope you found that interesting. There is a very British subject too, because there is just so much to cover. I do have a Facebook page called A Very British Subject, and I try to post something of interest there every couple of days, where an expression comes from or a little bit of British history. It is totally non-political. If you post anything on there about American politics or, you know, anything like that, sadly it will be deleted. It's welcome for everybody. And if you have a question about anything British, or, you know, you went there, you want to share a little story, please contact me on there, or any question that you might have. I also post on there when my next talks are going to be, and the libraries, as I say, you know, Omar and his team at Carol Stream and all the other librarians have worked so hard to cope with COVID to bring talks like this to you. So a big thank you to them. So if there are any questions, I'll take them through Omar. I hope I can answer them. But if you're leaving, have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. And I guess it's not too early to wish you happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.